I'm Brendan. I'm a low-carb success story from New Zealand, and I'm joined today by Dr. John Madany. John, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and where you're based in your practice?
Sure. I'm a family practice physician in Dillon, Montana, which is a rural area in southwest Montana, not far from Yellowstone. I work in a small, what we call critical access hospital, and it's a very collegial atmosphere, and we have incredible lab services, so it's kind of a unique place for somebody to be working where you have high technology in a small community.
And could you tell us a bit about how you got started in low carb?
My introduction to low carbohydrate was one of my colleagues gave me the book Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. And when I read the book, or when I saw the cover of the book, my first thought was some things I don't want to say because I knew better. But out of respect, I bought the book on Audible and listened to it within the next 2 days. And by the time I was done with the book, I knew it was right because I had been a serious low-fat, high whole grain person who was suffering from fatty liver disease and hypertension, doing all the right things more meticulously than most, and exercising every day. And I was sick. And I got over that in part through the low carb.
And so how have you then moved on to implementing low carb in your practice?
The first thing I did was, when I read the work of Gary Taubes, I didn't look up any of his references. I went straight to the National Library of Medicine where I have access, because we are a teaching hospital. Even though we're in a small town, we're part of the University of Washington system. And I did my own research, and basically you put in the words insulin and a chronic disease, and you find out that there's a mechanism that insulin is related to the chronic disease. We're not talking about correlation, we're talking about causation. And some people have noticed that if you go low carb, you lose weight immediately because you just all of a sudden the fluid retention caused by the high insulin, the fluid retention goes away, and you say, how did I lose 5 pounds in a week? It was water. So anyway, I learned about it, but then it was so radical that I would tell my patients, read the short version of Good Calories, Bad Calories, which is why we get fat and what to do about it. I said, read that so you don't think I'm crazy. And I gave up about an hour per patient of telling them I've been wrong. And it was so, sometimes you just know this explains it, which, and that's where some people went ahead of me. I get a phone call, my blood pressure is 80/40, and it's like, I told you don't do anything when you read the book. Come and talk to me about what it means. So people had to shed their pills, and I started to get into this de-prescribing before I knew there was de-prescribing. And it was just an incredible thing to see patients' medication lists shrink and their vitality improve. And take this with a little tongue-in-cheek. I almost have to counsel my patients that they might end up in the emergency room if they listen to my advice, because when you get off the sofa and end up on the ski hill, it could be a broken bone. And I've had people roll their four-wheelers, get hurt in skiing accidents. And this isn't because they're daredevils, it's just that when you're not sitting watching TV, you might need an orthopedic surgeon. Got to say that for fun, you know.
So in your time, no doubt, you'll have seen a few patients with some tremendous success stories. Do you have a particular example that comes to mind?
Yeah, I do. Probably one of the biggest success stories was one that I had been teaching low carb for years, but I had some hesitation. I knew that not everybody is going to respond to just the diet. And when I was introduced to Jason Fung's work on fasting, that wasn't as obvious that it was going to work. So I tried it on myself and found that there it worked as amazing as going low carb. When you first do fasting, it's like skip, I think it was 14 meals and lose 8 pounds over 2 months. How's that supposed to work? Well, because it's hormones, because it can't be calories. And so once I learned that, I had a patient come in dying of heart failure. I had known him for 20-some years. And he was in heart failure, and he weighed 410 pounds, probably about 50 pounds of water. He was admitted to the hospital, and I went to see him the evening of admission and got talking and said, "Hey, are you interested in fasting?" And he said, "Yeah." So I came back Saturday morning, and I just visit my patients in the hospital because I don't do hospital work anymore. And from that day on, he started low carb. He went through the keto flu while he was waiting to be admitted into a long-term care facility. He went into the long-term care facility, and I went over, it was in another town. I told the kitchen what he needed, and he got well enough that he could be discharged. But this is the amazing thing. At age 69, he leaves the long-term care facility on Friday, and by plan, he's back on Tuesday doing volunteer activities in the long-term care facility. And he's still doing that 2 years later. His weight's down in the mid-200s, and he says, "You know, I was shy to go to the locker room in high school. I've got my weight, finally, I've got my weight problem addressed." The other amazing thing is that he was a diabetic. I met him when he was in a hypoglycemic episode, my first day in town, in a smaller town nearby. In 1997, he was being treated for diabetes. He already had broken bones in his feet from neuropathy. And here he is, 20-some years later, on paper. You look at his labs and his medication list, he's not diabetic. Still in a wheelchair, but happy as a clam. And he would be happy to be here, to have his name named. This isn't a confidentiality. And that's one thing in a small town. There's hundreds of people know who I'm talking about if they listen to this, but not a problem. And so when you look at that, where you take somebody from dying from problems that lasted his whole life, he gets freedom from that, and then he's working in a long-term care facility where there's such a shortage of labor. So it's like incredible to see these people almost come out of the grave. And it's not the only person I've had that's gone from depressed heart failure to back into the workforce after retirement. So that's another thing I almost need to counsel people on, is you might end up working again. I mean, and I know some people might be intimidated that they might lose their disability because they might come alive.
What are some of the barriers or challenges that you find with some people struggling to take up low carb?
One of the things is there's still the culture, the potlucks. Like my patient that lost all the weight, when he goes to church potluck, trouble. Ben Bickman addressed this in one of his views about the perils of prosperity, is that there's still people bringing donuts into the break room in my clinic, and people really flaunt it. And I better be careful, but it is what it is. It's this, I don't want you to succeed, because if I don't get you to eat a donut, you're going to look good and I'm not. And that's where we get into the addiction thing. Isn't it sad that the medical profession promoted addiction foods as being the health foods? And that's just is what it is. And to me, I'm a little bit in a different situation. People say, "Do you have any trouble not eating bread anymore?" And it's like, no, I'm the guy that has a pedal power grain mill, and my wife made the homemade bread. I made homemade bread when I was in college. I was going to do this right. And I say, to give up your blood pressure pills, to give up the joint pain, it's just incredible. Why would I want to do that? And on it goes.
So how do you see low carb diets gaining more acceptance, both with your patients and your professional colleagues?
I'm getting more referrals because some of my new patients that I find are the best ones to take care of are folks that have been in intensive care due to complications of morbid obesity in combination with metabolic syndrome. So they're the very sick, and to see these people go from intensive care unit sepsis, cellulitis, edematous extremities to back living again is amazing. But this is the biggest thing I'm worried about, is that I'm seeing young people who are in their 20s that are sicker than their parents, who are in their 40s, who are sicker than me in their 60s. And then there's my dad who doesn't have metabolic syndrome at 92. And it's like, what's going on here? You know, I mean, my dad does translation work for work at 92 between multiple languages. Well, his kids don't have that cognitive function, and his grandkids have metabolic syndrome at age in their 20s. It's really sad.
And so how would you say this has changed the way you feel about your work?
It's why I'm still working. I'd say it's the best retirement program ever, is loving your job. And where it's basically kept me from retiring. And and it's just like looking forward to going to work every day, and just it's amazing, and it just makes me so enthusiastic, even though it's a struggle and I put in incredible hours, because nobody pays you to talk to people. So it's, you know, my days are very long. You know, like the other day, just on my way here, stop in the nursing home at 8 at night just to say, talk to one of my patients that's there for metabolic syndrome. You know, these are folks that are debilitated from it. And you walk in, oh, I didn't expect to see you. And it's like, well, if I'm going out of town for a few days, I do have to check on you, because it's such cheerleading. Because can you imagine people fasting in a nursing home? It's like they have to choose that. I'd be on 60 Minutes if I wrote an order for that. So it's kind of funny to have people where you have to coach them. It's like, do you think you could skip a meal? Do you think you could skip a meal? But when they do, it's just wild.
Dr. John Madany, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.